everyone, and welcome to our digital class on sports sponsorships as part of Event Marketers Experiential Marketing Month. Thank you for joining us. I'm joined today by three panelists who are going to share all of their insights and perspectives on what you need to know about sports sponsorships. So let me introduce the panel for you today. So up first, we have Brooke Donberg, Head of Partnership and Experiential Marketing at CLIF. Hi, Brooke.
Hey, excited to be here.
Great to have you. And then we have Matt Herrick, Sponsorships Marketing Manager at BMO. Hi,
Well,
Matt.
hey, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
And then we lastly have Paul Ioakim, GM Experiences at GameSquare. Hey, Paul.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
All right. So let's just go ahead and dive into our conversation. I'm sure our audience is excited to hear about sports sponsorships. So, first off, I'd like to go into when evaluating a new sports partnership or market, what are you looking for? What boxes need to be checked to make sure that it's going to be the right fit for you?
I could start. I think, for what we do in the world of, as a financial institution, those boxes vary from market to market. There's markets that we're very well established in. So the things you're looking to check maybe more on the experiential and hospitality side for established clients or, prospective clients. And then when you go somewhere new, as we did a few years back when we began our, foray out into the western part of the United States, when we acquired Bank of the West, it's all about the ways you can just introduce yourself to a completely new customer base. So you can see that with us, how we would activate on something like the Chicago Bulls, which we've been with for a really long time. And we're always trying to find new ways to bring in new clients, to have them experience once in a lifetime things, whether that's like playing on the court at the United Center. But then if you look at Los Angeles, we did a naming rights deal for the stadium and created BMO Stadium with LAFC, really as a way to put a billboard and, put a stake in the ground to let people know we were there. So it varies, I think, depending on the market. But, some of the basics are always there: brand awareness and, customer acquisition or retention.
Yeah, I think just to kind of keep going on that, Matt, I think that the life cycle of the brand and where you're at in that brand cycle is really important. So, as brands launch, obviously awareness is such a critical play. And I'm sure Brooke will talk a little bit about this as well. If trial and getting the product into people's hands is of a priority, then that's kind of a pretty interesting catalyst to restructure or structure a sponsorship deal. And I think that's something to think about is what piece of this can your brand own or activate around is how you should be evaluating a sponsorship.
Yeah, to build on what Paul and Matt said, our criteria is often shifting depending on what our objectives are. But as a nutrition brand, we are really looking for places where our brand can show up authentically and where the function of our product makes sense for either the athletes participating because we're rooted in endurance and adventure sport, but also how we show up for spectators and fans. And we're often looking for events where we can really resonate in that given market, but that platform of the event allows us to extend reach as well.
Yeah, lots of different goals here, but I think it all ladders up to the same thing, even though there are different kind of industries and you have different audience spaces. You still can kind of just see similarities across the different goals that you have. And so, we see a lot of different levels to sports sponsorship. It can just be the name of something. You can have a booth. You can activate at an event. You can have some kind of like in-stadium campaign, for example. So what are some considerations you look for when deciding how you want to activate within a partnership? Like what are you looking at when you consider like serving as a title sponsor versus just kind of activating at a sporting event?
I can kick us off there. I think something that's ownable is really important. And I think in a world that's fairly cluttered when it comes to brand messaging and even sponsorships, I mean, you watch, a NFL Monday Night Football, and you're probably exposed to hundreds, if not thousands of brand messages in that, 3 hour window. I think finding within whatever sponsorship you're looking at, what's that piece that you could truly own, I think is really important. And Matt, not to kind of touch on BMO here, but one of the recent examples that I saw that I think was really perfect was DoorDash's sponsorship of LAFC. I don't know if anybody saw that, but during the breaks, as they cut to an LAFC legend, Carlos Vea, every time they cut to him, he had ordered something different from DoorDash. And it was not things that you would find in stadium. He was painting, he was ordering scarves. It was all sorts of just random things. And I just thought it was really clever that in a really cluttered environment in stadium, there's beer sponsorship, there's car sponsorship, there's DoorDash sponsorship. In a world where you can't actually really integrate with the product, authentically in a stadium like that, for them to have that messaging, I thought it was really powerful, and it seemed to be a really great partnership and activation for them. I think that's an opportunity of like looking for something that's ownable for their brand.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think soccer is a really interesting place to live with sponsorships because unlike a lot of places, when you do a sports sponsorship, you have the opportunity in a lot of sports to do, on court things and, in-game promos. And soccer's a really interesting nut to crack because there aren't a lot of opportunities for that. Once the game kicks off, it's 45 nonstop minutes of action and there's no timeouts. If at a football game, the NFL, you sort of have that advantage of, cutting to the sidelines and here's three people who are receiving a check or whatever it is you're trying to do to make people recognize your brand. So what DoorDash did was unique to them, and I think integrating, as you said, Carlos Vela as a legend was a really great idea. I think we talk about what you're looking for and what makes you say, do I want to name the stadium or do I just want to do a smaller partnership? A lot of it, comes down to for us, for a financial institution is we look at it as one of our main goals. A lot of places is category exclusivity. What do we have to invest in a partnership to kind of box every other competitor out? Because I'd really rather be in a stadium and have them only see BMO as the only bank, whether that's through ATMs that are in the venue or whether that's the name on a jersey or however we do that, however we want to structure that deal. It's not always about having the big name on the side of the stadium, although we obviously have done that, but also just a way to be the bank involved with this property, which makes a big difference, I think, for fandom, because then we start getting identified, if that's with the Milwaukee Bucks for the official bank of the Bucks. So does that identify us a little bit with Giannis Antetokounmpo? Maybe. But I think that's a big part of the evaluation is it's what can we invest and be efficient with our dollars. And sometimes those naming rights deals are not the most efficient use of our money, whereas category exclusivity can be on a smaller scale, depending on the market.
Yeah, and Brooke, you were gonna mention something?
yeah. The point of creating something that's ownable is really important for our brand, especially in the spaces that we play in. As an example, within running, seeing brands show up who aren't sponsors of the events make a bigger splash than brands that are sponsors because they're building a really unique pop-up experience outside of the event footprint. So, as an example, we're the official nutrition partner of Boston Marathon. We have category exclusivity there and activated at the expo and leveraged all of the entitlements, but invested more heavily in our pop up space that really allowed us to generate earned PR, create content, and also compete with some of the other brands that were doing the same thing.
Yeah, and Matt, you mentioned this, and Brooke as well, this category exclusivity. And so I think that right there is kind of like a win for your partnership. Like you already have something that you can claim, like this is successful because we're the only name that people are seeing around here. And so, what are some other ways that you're defining the success in a partnership? Like, what other metrics are most valuable as you consider this worked, this didn't, maybe next time we'll go for a title sponsorship, or maybe we'll just hang back and just keep with this activation space? Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I would say when you're looking at, evaluating a partnership, again, it can always vary a little bit because,
Mhm.
size of investment, what resources are you putting into it? I do think that the marketing return is very important. We measure a lot, as anyone does. You're measuring even just every time that your logo shows up. Like, what is the value on that TV broadcast when that BMO logo plasters itself on an LED, or if we're on a sign, or how does that work and what is that getting us? Are we using that efficiently? That space we have, that a special piece of land that we have on a broadcast. What's that number? Is it worth the investment? It's the return. It's not really, this is not a deep concept. It's the return on that. It's that ROI. And then I think, another way that you will always, especially when you have category exclusivity and you have naming rights and you've invested a fair amount into these partnerships is what business are we getting, not just from new clients and new customers, but are we getting business with those people that we're doing business with? Are we able to build a relationship with a team so that there is something happening there, that there's We've all, we are seen as it makes a big difference, obviously. If we're going to be the category exclusive partner of any team, how are we, do they see us as a good partner that they want to bank with, for example? You want to be able to feel like you're doing business with the people that you do business with. And so I think that's a backside, way of looking at it. I'm sure, like, with the Boston Marathon, that it's probably good that they would be, they would want your product in their runner bag or whatever it is beyond just the partnership. Or do the staff there, embrace what you're selling? I think that makes a big difference, and it does add to the bottom line and the return on the relationship.
Yeah, I think also kind of keep going there. How do you extend the reach beyond those partnership deliverables, right? We spend so long negotiating the media and the activation rights and all of those elements. But in reality, something like a stadium sponsorship's a 10, 20-year deal, right? Like, how do we continue over the years to extend that reach? And that's where, I think in big brand business, it's, do I have the buy-in of all of the stakeholders, from PR to media to the experiential team, to truly leverage that partnership? Because the deliverables, hopefully that, and BMO, and all that will certainly pay for themselves and would be a great deal. But I think the true value and the true success is, can we truly infiltrate, this audience and beyond through these additional tactics that you add to that partnership?
And one more thing on that alignment, you bring up that alignment. And it's really important, I think, particularly in a naming rights deal, because you have to work really hard to wring value out of those naming rights, because there's a lot of obstacles out there kind of pushing back on you sometimes, not from the team itself. The teams are great partners, but you have something at a place called BMO Stadium, and I'm going to pick on, like the World Cup, for example, and the Olympics, which are two events that are going to happen in Los Angeles for the next like 4 years. And there's no interest, if you paid attention at all, like for FIFA to want to use the partner name on any stadium that they're going into in 2026. They're calling it the New York, New Jersey Stadium. Sorry, MetLife, and those types of things. So it becomes really incumbent on your partnership with the team to make sure that, all, like you said, all those press releases, all the stuff you're doing is calling the building by the name it is. And then you do pick up additional lift, when the right band plays there in a concert and they're tagging you, 2 days later. I had a great concert last night at BMO Stadium. We don't pay them to do that. That's just sort of that nice, unearned media that you like to get out of those partnerships. But that takes work. I mean, I will tell you that when we started that partnership, I know we were kind of joking before this started, is it BMO or BMO? I mean, we had newsrooms in Los Angeles that know how to say the name. And thank goodness we had partners at LAFC that were calling newsrooms going, please say the name of the stadium right. You have to work hard on a namings right deal to get the value back. It's there, but you make a great point that, it takes some time to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure. Brooke, any additional insights or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can all agree that measuring ROI around event and experiential marketing can be challenging. And it's why, to Matt and Paul's point, it's really important to build an ecosystem around the partnership. When CLIF thinks about our partnership model, it includes events, platforms, and athletes. And we build plans, as an example, using Boston again, around Boston Marathon, where we're leveraging our professional athletes who are extending reach. We're also leveraging our platform partner, Strava, who actually helps us with some lower funnel tactics. And then that way we're rounding it out with a full funnel approach to a partnership like Boston. But it is challenging, especially Paul brought up earlier, sampling and trial. That's a metric that's really important to us, and we're constantly selling it in as a great business driver, but it is harder to measure that.
Yeah, and sports are very volatile. There are definitely highs and lows as you go week to week, month to month, season to season. And so how are you staying flexible or maybe even pivoting? Like when big things happen, like a player gets traded or maybe a team's not doing so well or something like that. Things happen and they come up and the fans get upset or they get very excited. So how are you kind of going through those different highs and lows through the season?
I can kick us off there. So we come at this from our perspective as actually rights holders in this space. So we own Phase Esports. So we're constantly dealing with new sponsorship deals and new brands coming into the ecosystem. And it's a great question because, there are going to be seasons in certain titles where our teams are really successful, they're playing really well. And there's going to be other times when, they're just not playing as well or they get beaten in stages. But it ultimately comes down to are you delivering the value? And so the deal of any sponsorship really isn't tied to the success of the team. It's really tied to the in our world, it's the media impressions that you're able to deliver. We are, again, Phase Esports is the biggest brand in the space. So you're not really buying titles, although that's
Mhm.
nice and a real feel good. You are buying the reach of our audience and and the buy-in of that community. So, when you have a great brand, like an LAFC, like a Boston Marathon type of audience, they're loyal to those events and those entities like Phase, regardless of whether they win or not. And I think all three of those examples between Boston, LAFC, and ourselves, you'll find the fan base is really strong. And I think that's when you're evaluating a sponsorship, I'd be looking at orgs and events that have longevity in that space, which is also, as a rights holder, difficult to sell sponsorship in year one or two, right, of any event. And I think that's part of the reason is you haven't really proven that you have a sticky audience. And I think across all three of those examples where Brooke, Matt, and myself are involved, the consistency is probably the sticky audience that you have.
I have my colleague, the day I started in sponsorships 10 years ago, one of the first things that was drilled into my head is we don't buy wins and losses. So, as you're thinking about who brings deals forward and says, come be part of this, leading with we've won the last two Super Bowls, the last three this doesn't do much for me because I don't know what that means in terms of, like you said, the stickiness of the fan base. And it's fun. I mean, if you're in sponsorships, obviously it's a lot more fun to be tracking on a winner and kind of get a little excited, I think, in terms of your own morale. But I think that is not why my bank wants to be involved in sponsorships. And like the Chicago Bulls are a good example. That's a franchise with 6 world championships. Michael Jordan. It's not a stretch to say that the performance on the court in the last like 4 or 5 years has not been on par with a 6 championship performance. But they lead the NBA in attendance. So like those wins and losses, like you can have these real, yeah, you can have a 10 game losing streak, but you don't react in the partnership that way. Where you're reacting in the partnership is what are the fans wanting to see? Like what do I have to do to get my logo in the hands of the fans and that sticky fan base? And in that one, we partner a lot with the community, and we have artists in the community who make design hats and the Bulls logos on the hat and the BMO logos on the hat, and 10,000 people get the hat, and that's just another way that regardless of whether or not the product on the court is living up to the high NBA standard, the Oklahoma Thunder. Is that what's happening? Maybe not. The fans are really excited. That's a great. I mean, I often for the United Center is like Chicago's greatest nightclub with kind of who's there and what's happening. I mean, look at Madison Square Garden over the years. The Knicks weren't very good, but Spike Lee was still showing up, so the fans were there. One more thing, and I know you mentioned what happens if there's a big trade, and I think this is a good example recently for us going back to LAFC a little bit. I mean, they signed Sun Heung-min, like in August, kind of out of nowhere, who's like the greatest South Korean soccer player with this huge fan base and this huge social following, who I had to learn a lot about. But from the moment he showed up, it kind of changed the game for us on how we were approaching certain aspects of that partnership because a different group of people started paying a lot of attention. I think that was international soccer really started paying attention to what was happening. And we've been learning on the fly. I mean, I'll be honest, it's been about 2 months since that signing. And with the partners there and the team there, we've spent a lot of time going, okay, how do we integrate this effectively for us? The sidebar there is it's been really helpful to already be the kit partner. So to already have his face going out with our logo on his chest as a part of that investment has been super valuable to us. But you have to be ready to think fast in partnerships and in sports partnerships. What's on the page of the contract, especially if it says 10-year deal on day one, is going to have to change at some point. And you're going to have to be able to look at your partners and say, we got to trade some assets and swap some stuff in and out. Equal value, but this isn't working for us, or we see this is transformed. Social media is different today than it was 10 years ago. Lots of things you have to think about in that context.
Yeah, being nimble, super important. And Brooke, I started saying something.
As a brand that works with mostly athletes involved in individual sports,
Mhm.
model's a little different, but I think what we are finding is that fans of these athletes care about them as whole people more so how they're stacking up wins and losses. And so when we evaluate athletes we want to work with, we ensure that our values align and that there's opportunity for storytelling year round. And so we build a plan with them before the year starts where we know we're going to talk about what they're doing in their community or what they're doing with their foundation to ensure that they're still great content to be created and stories to be told regardless of how they're performing.
Brooke, have you found? I'm going to just jump in. I have a question because I something we've found with storytelling that when we talk about a lot of now is integrating women's sports into the portfolios. It feels like we found that the women athletes, female athletes, are a lot better at the storytelling and the social. And I don't know why that is, but it seems like they need a lot less coaching in that space, and they're almost a more valuable play on a one-to-one athlete relationship than sometimes on the male side.
Think it is because women have had to market themselves over the years to compete for share of voice. And I think their ability to do that is reflected in the success of women's sports. So yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this fan base that you all have been mentioning. Across sports, fans vary wildly. There's been like women's soccer that we were just talking about, like they're gaining fans. WNBA is gaining a huge amount of fans recently, but the esports fan is probably different from the soccer fan. And so I'd love for you all to share your takes on how fans are evolving in the sports that you have been partnering with, especially when we consider Gen Z and Gen Alpha, because then we have these demographic differences among fans. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on that.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. This is an area that we certainly specialize in, particularly around the Gen Z and Gen Alpha. I think gone are the days where we're looking at our audiences solely with one passion point, right? Like
Mhm.
solely just football or solely just basketball or solely just esports. There's an enormous crossover. I mean, if you just watch an NBA game now, right? It all starts with the fashion that they're walking in to the stadium on. What music are they listening to? So, very rarely, and I don't think any great sponsorship, should be just looking at one passion point. I think, as I said, if we look at these audiences as really there's so much crossover, it's all entertainment, is what we say, right? And you could just happen to be leading with sport or leading with music or leading with fashion. They all have an enormous crossover. So yeah, that's I think on that point is I think I know we're talking about sports sponsorship specifically, but I think any activation around sports should certainly be noting these other passion points around fashion. Even in the running space, Brooke, it's what shoes are you wearing?
Mhm.
What athleisure wear do you wear? Like all of that is a bit of a badge of fashion. And what music do you listen to while you're running? Like all of that stuff is really important. And I think on this kind of new emerging demographic, the Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience, it's really challenging. And I think this is where Matt was talking about, you know, sponsorships over the course of time. If they're a 10 and 20-year deal, for those deliverables to be set the same 20 years down the track or 10 years down the track, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think they need to evolve. We know now this audience spends their lives, they're chronically online, right? Like, and it's, they're digitally native, all these buzzwords, but it's true, right? Like where they were engaging more IRL, they're engaging more digitally. So any sponsorship, if we looked at a sports team sponsorship or an event sponsorship, I think needs to include some sort of digital/creator deliverables within that to be able to reach this audience. Otherwise, you're leaving a huge segment out. I mean, things like these challenges aren't, so I'll hand it off to everybody else here in a sec, but these challenges aren't unique for a brand as they are for a league, right? The NFL has the same challenges as say a Toyota does, is how do we engage a younger demographic? And it's part of these new emerging medias like mass creator deployment, kind of having creators on site, influencers on site, things like that are all helping us expand our sponsorships.
It is about consumption. I mean, I think it's how people are consuming the games is what has changed so much with the fan bases. I think gone are the days of watching 162 baseball games, inning one to inning nine. It just isn't what's happening. And you see it with the way the leagues are moving their content to streaming and everywhere else. It creates a real challenge on our end because broadcast was such an important part of all these contracts. Like, how many times are you showing up on the broadcast and what's the value of the broadcast? It's still highly valuable, but I think Adam Silver got himself in a slight bit of trouble recently saying, kind of out loud that, fans are consuming highlights more. We're a highlights league. We're not necessarily a full game broadcast league. And he had to walk it back a little bit. He wasn't wrong. I mean, people are watching on their phones on the way to work to see the great dunk of last night. They're watching whole games in 5 minutes, to kind of to gather what happens. So it's all about how people are consuming. I think there is a lot of crossover between esports and basketball and football, but I don't think outside of the NFL, and I don't have proof of this, people are necessarily locking in for all of these games on broadcasters where you used to make a lot of hay for your brand. And so moving forward, that's going to be key is, how do you show up on right now it's TikTok, but it'll be something different in 6 months. But, how do you show up there? And how do you appeal to fans in that space? That's the challenge going forward for probably I think that's the big challenge of sports probably for the next 2 to 5 years is just establishing what it means to be a more of a content deliverable than necessarily like everyone wanting to watch 2 hours a night. That's a big investment for people.
I think like just to keep going there a little bit, I think trends are are changing quicker than they ever have, right? Like what's hot today will not be hot in 3 months' time. And so, having I think Matt and Brooke, you may both mention this around the flexibility in a partnership, I think is critical of to be able to evolve the tone that you have on socials versus on site, versus, kind of in mass PR is I think is the sign of a good partnership and also a good company that has the buy-in to be able to be flexible in that, I think is critical. Otherwise, this Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience will move on. They
Mhm.
will move on to something else.
Yeah, and I'll build. I think the confluence of sport and culture is so significant right now. And Paul, you mentioned it, but like running fashion is cool now. It certainly wasn't a decade ago. And participants are looking for brands that see them as a whole person. And I think Nike's done a really good job with their After Dark series where they have top billing music artists playing after people run their race. And we tried to bring elements of fashion and music into our experience in Boston. And that then unlocked the ability to create great short form content that we know the audiences were engaged with. And then to build on that and going back to the question, Matt, about women's sports, that is something we know younger audiences across gender are really excited about. And so as a brand that isn't necessarily going to sponsor a team or a league, how do we find the right athletes within the WNBA and the NWSL as an example to storytell around and leverage as an ambassador to our brand?
Yeah, lots of great takeaways there. Basically, just striking while it's hot, engaging the right athletes who are open to that content creation, who have the fans who would be interested in that, kind of delving into like, hey, maybe we can incorporate more like fashion things and bring in a new audience here into sports. And I think that there were so many great takeaways there. But we are running low on time, so we will wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you, Brooke, Paul, and Matt, for joining me in this conversation. I know that there were plenty moments where I'm sure our viewers were taking notes. I was as well. And I just want to say thank you all for coming on. And coming up this week, we have even more as part of Experiential Marketing Month. We have a webinar on measuring sustainability in events tomorrow, as well as 2 meetups in Washington, D.C. and in Boston. And then our Trend Watch seminar is headed to New York City on Thursday. So all the details for that is at eventmarketer.com, and we hope you can join us as we continue with this exciting month. But thank you for watching, and thank you to our panelists for joining. Catch you next time. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.